Okay, now we are continuing our learning in the the essay, the discourse, which is found in the book called Likuti Torah by the first Rebbe of Chabad, written about 250 years ago. And it's dealing with exactly what was the source of the argument between Korach and Moses, and why Korach succeeded in his bid to oppose Moses. He succeeded in convincing, in the end, all the Jewish people to oppose Moses. What exactly was the point? What was his point? So he says the point was, like everything else in the world, it has a very deep spiritual source. And like everything else in the world, the spiritual as well as the physical, it all comes from God. So everything somehow or other, and its source at least, is good. It's good. Even if that good means it has to be eradicated. Well, that's the good. God created it in order to do something with it. Right? Certain things have to be eradicated. That's what's good. Like you hire a gardener to pull out the weeds. So the weeds are a good thing. If there was no weeds, right, you hire a mechanic, auto mechanic, right? His whole thing is that if people's cars don't work, so malfunctions are a good thing. If there was no malfunctions, then the mechanic wouldn't be able to do anything. Doctors, right? Doctors deal with people who are sick. So is being sick good? I mean, as far as doctors goes, if there was nobody sick, so there wouldn't be many doctors. Even though the Lubavitcher Rebbe said that in the future, in the accomplishments of the Moshiach will be the people won't be sick. So, but you'll still need doctors, to tell people that they aren't sick. Because they say that a hypochondriac is worse than a truly sick person. Because a truly sick person, you can heal him. An hypochondriac, no matter what you do, he's always going to convince a hypochondriac that he's not sick. This is sometimes even harder than to heal a truly sick person. So there'll be also, that's what the Rebbe is trying to do us to hear. He's trying to tell us that a lot of people are really sick spiritually, but 99% of them just think they're sick, because that's what we've been taught in schools, and we've been, not that God doesn't exist, and not to believe in God, and that the Torah has been changed, the Torah has been altered, or the Torah has been misinterpreted, or to hate this person, or hate the rabbis, or hate the commandments, or hate something. So everybody has just been sort of, brain dirtied by the world. And we have to be brain cleaned. I don't like to say the word brainwash because it has a bad connotation, even though I don't know why, to tell you the truth. Washing is bad. Who says washing is bad? Anyway, so now what the Rebbe is trying to do, and even if he succeeds with one person, he has succeeded. As that is to give everybody the true picture of what's really going on, who we really are, how much God really loves us and cares for us and creates us and believes in us and has entrusted us with this tremendous responsibility, each and every one of us, to change the world. And that's the purpose of the Jews, is to educate the whole world. But first of all, the Jews have to be educated. So that's what the Rebbe is trying to do here. That's why he says the Rebbe is the Moshiach of his generation. Each and every one of the Chabad Rebbe's, because the whole thing of the Moshiach is mainly education. Education. Simply educating people who they really are. What is reality? What is the creator of reality? What does the creator of reality want from us? First of all, is there such a thing as a creator? And what does he want from us? Okay. So here we have, like, about once in a while, this whole thing bubbles over. Namely, what do you call it? Dichotomy? Is a word like that? Between what is and what's supposed to be. Between the creation alone and the creation with the creator. Between a meaningless world or a meaningful world. Between a world with responsibility, humanity with responsibility or humanity with no responsibility. So if you say the world has no responsibility and there's no meaning, so that frees a lot of people, to do whatever you want. The problem is nobody knows what they want. They're free to do whatever they can. And they say you got freedom of speech, we got nothing to say. So people make up all sorts of things what they want. We're going to see the deep down. That was the argument between Moses and Korach. But like we say, everything comes from God. So everything is essentially good, even though externally it could be the worst possible, right? So we have to say that Hitler comes from God and that Amalek comes from God and Stalin comes from God, and because God creates everything. God is infinitely good. So if we create, so the good of these things, the Nazis, the good of them is you have to wipe them out. That's good. It gives us a task what to do. Not nowadays, I don't know. Nowadays, it says only Moshiach can tell us really what to do. But nevertheless, when Moshiach does inform us who this evil forces in the world are, as it's a thing to wipe them out. Okay, but Korach was not one of them. Korach not necessarily was essentially evil. Not necessarily. We'll see. His followers could be saved. He had to be wiped out, but it says that eventually they're going to do tshuva. His children did. Okay, if you remember yesterday, we were talking about these Kabbalistic ideas, the whole source of this argument between Korach and Moses. And basically, it's the idea, what are the commandments? What are the commandments? So first of all, we'll talk about the creation of the world. God created the world through his speech. God gave the commandments also through his speech. God created the world through his will. God gave the commandments also through God's will. The big difference is in the world, there is bad. The world seems like something totally separate from God. And the commandments don't, except to the degree that they're in the world. But the fact of the matter is the commandments are pure godliness. That's what they are. The world covers over the godliness, but nevertheless it's godliness. Okay, so the Rebbe explained that there is two aspects of God. One of them is called how God surrounds the worlds. One's how God fills the worlds. That what God surrounds the worlds means that God is everywhere and everything. Equally. He creates everything, he enlivens everything, but everything is equal. Everything that exists, souls, bodies, angels, everything that exists, the fact that it exists, that's this aspect of God that surrounds all the worlds. The spiritual worlds, the physical worlds, the highest worlds, the lowest worlds, that's all what's called, so just the fact that they exist. There's worlds which are before the Tzimtzum, that's what's called Sovev Kolmin. Sometimes it's called Makif. Sometimes it's called the Igul. Okay, now this mime was very long, so I want to sort of jump around as much as I can. I want to skip a little bit, and I hope the Rebbe will forgive me because we'll never finish. Okay. So here we see, let's see where we have this. Here we go. All right, anyway, we're continuing on this same vein that we had before. Let's just see the previous page 1 second. Yeah, okay. So a few more Kabbalistic ideas. Here we go. It's known in Eitz Chaim. Eitz Chaim is a Kabbalistic book which was the wisdom of the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, written down by his prime main pupil, which was Rab Chaim Vital. That's the book called Eitz Chaim. In the book, the Eitz Chaim, Inyan HaKav V'chut, this whole idea of how God created the world with his speech. This, so to speak, this speech is called the Kav V'chut. It's called the, how do you say, the line and the thread. And this thread comes from God himself. This is like we say, God's speech coming from. This comes from Or Ein Sof. This is in order that there can be shining, what's called an inside light, that there can be all these distinctions and differences in the world, that rocks are different than plants, and plants are different than animals, and there's who knows how many types of rocks, how many types of plants, how many types of animals there are, and bugs, and each one has its own different type of soul. That's only physical. Then there's also the spiritual worlds. There's the spiritual worlds, which are then where the angels are. There's this lower physical dimension, which is called Asiya. Above that is called Yetzira. That's where the angels are. Bria, that's where the souls are. Then there's world of Atzilut. That's like pure godliness, but it's not God himself. Pure godliness. These are all revelations of God. These are what's called worlds. This comes from what's called God's inside light, the light that can be articulated, God's speech. The beginning of this revelation is what's called Chachma. This is for Chachma. We're going to see that there's higher levels of that, but this is what's called Chachma. The Chachma is the highest of the 10 Sfirot, and loosely called, translated as wisdom. It's pure life. It's above understanding. And this is called Mamalik Olam. This is the beginning of how God fills the worlds. Shemeir B'kol Olam, that it shines in every world and in every creation, Lefi Arko, according to its level. Amnam, but God himself, so to speak, is more represented by this aspect of his, which is called Sovev Kolmim. Sovev Kolmim, this is God surrounding all the worlds. What does it mean, surrounding all the worlds? Like I said, he defies all definition. God is not up, he's not down, he's not inside, he's not out. There's no changes whatsoever, but he creates everything. This is the Or Ein Sof. This is the infinite light of God, which is not articulated. This is pure creative force. Hamakiv L'Kol Olamos, which encompasses all the worlds equally from the head of Adam Kadmon. Now, Adam Kadmon, that's the beginning of this kav, of this pillar, like the preparation of God to speak, if you want to call it. Ad regli Asiya, until the feet of Asiya. Asiya is this physical world. From the highest of spiritual levels to the lowest of spiritual levels. And this level of Ak means Adam Kadmon. Adam Kadmon means the beginning of God's, how do you say, of God's limiting himself, you want to call it that, limiting his light. God doesn't limit himself, he limits his light. Until Paragli Asiya, until this physical world, the Gam Makif as a Kav, and he surrounds all this thing of this pillar and this Kav. Okay. Now, what's the Rebbe trying to do over here? He wants to stress to us that God is everywhere. He wants to stress to us that God is found everywhere. But on the other hand, God is totally above any possible definition or thought of being something, anything similar to anything in the creation. God is not spiritual. God is not the source of the spiritual. God reveals himself in the source of the spiritual. That's this level of Chachma. Reveals himself. But above that, there's aspects of God which, so to speak, he can't reveal. It's not revealed godliness. It's pure godliness, and that's the fact that everything exists. So the existence of everything is beyond any definition. No one can explain what definition is, what existence is. To the degree that some people say it's subjective, it's all in our minds, because it's just so beyond any sort of, how do you say, handle. You can't put a handle on. It's pure existence. On the other hand, it's infinitely close to us. We exist, here we are. How do we exist? God himself is creating us. But on the other hand, he's creating everything different, so everything seems to be natural that God is not here. That's these two aspects of God, how God fills the world and surrounds the world. Now, this aspect of God, when this thing of surrounding the world, this does away with any thought of God being separate from the world. In other words, in a way, let's make this bigger. When this thing of God surrounding the world, right, and being above the world, this knocks out any what's called sitra achra, any thought that maybe there's something else except for God. Maybe there's God and there's also the world. Maybe there's God and there's also me. Right? Maybe there's me and there's also God. Maybe there's just me. Maybe there's just me. All these feelings of maybe God does not exist, or God is not powerful, or God is that all comes from what's called mamalik holmin, how God fills the worlds. But the Soviet holmin, that God surrounds all the worlds, and He is above the world, that's pure godliness. There's no room for saying there's something else except for God. That's pure existence. Okay, we're talking about things that are basically impossible to understand because we can't really even understand the spiritual. Okay, now get a few more Kabbalistic things, and then we're going to start to jump to another place. Hine, behold, Shoresh Makifim, the source of all this, what's called surrounding levels, that God surrounds the world. Soviv Kolmim, it's also called Makifim. This comes from a level, from, if you want to call it a tendency of God that He has, which is called Igulim. Igulim v'yosher. Igulim, this is how God, by His nature, surrounds and is outside of any definition. Same thing we said before, Soviv, it's the same thing. Basically a different name for the same thing. Even though that God is the creator and He's the one that creates this kav and the chut, God's words, it's not two things. There's God and also the creation. And even though that this surrounding level of God, this pure, if you want to call it godliness, is drawn into this pillar and this line of godliness, of God's speech, that from it is drawn down also this makifim, these surrounding levels in all the worlds, right? How is it that angels exist? Because they exist because of this level of makifim, but they're angels, they're different. And each angel is different from every other angel. How does that happen? It says because these makifim are drawn down through this God's speech. Aval became nevertheless, Shorsh Makifim, the source of everything, is Nimshach, from this eagle agadol, from what's called the great circle, which surrounds everything. Okay, 1 second, let me this. Skip. This is on a footnote by the Rebbe, and it's really not a good thing to skip these things, but like I say, we're really pressed for time, sort of, or at least I'm pressed for time. So let's go over to here. Oh. Okay, oh, here we go. We got the end here. Okay. And this is the union of the two sentences we just said. What is it? One says, the heavens and the earth, I fill. Ani mamish, God's essence. Like we said, the Soviv calling, how God surrounds all definition, pure God. Nothing can hide Him, nothing can change Him, pure godliness. The Kassid, but it's also written, it says that the whole earth is filled with His glory. Kavodo, I know, rak ziv, just a ray of godliness and not God Himself. So what's filling the world? God's essence or just a ray of God? Huh? It's like saying, is this a picture of of Abraham Lincoln, or is it Abraham Lincoln himself? What's going on over here? It says, oh, it's both. This world is a picture of God. That's this mamalik, and it's the essence of God. I don't understand. If it's the essence of God, what do you need the picture for? We have to. It says because if there was no picture, if there was no mamalik holmin, that God fills the world, so there wouldn't be any differentiations in the world. It would just be pure godliness, and there wouldn't be any world. That there wouldn't have the Torah, there wouldn't have people, there wouldn't be the whole Torah. Is because God wants the world. This is a very important thing. God's essence wants the world. That's the whole story of the Torah. God wants the world. The world is tremendously, tremendously important to God. The world affects God. This makes really no sense. Up to now, maybe a little bit it made sense. Now we're really, as soon as God gave the Torah, the whole thing flipped around. Before God gave the Torah, this world was the lowest place. God was not revealed here. A few people, Abraham, it says before him, Noah, Before him there was Metushelach, there was people, Chanoch. They revealed there is such a thing as God, a creator. They broke through. But when God gave the Torah, then all of a sudden everything turned around. This world, this physical world, became the highest place. Here we could have an effect on God. We can have an effect on God. True that Abraham and Noah also did. It says Noah found favor in God's eyes and said. We'll talk about the Torah in a second. So there's two aspects of God. We're just talking about the creation. We're not talking about giving the Torah yet, Jewish people. No, just creation. One aspect of the creation is that God says, I myself fill the world. I. God's essence. We'll see that the reason that this essence, why God made the whole business in the first place, why God wants there to be a world, is for the Torah. We'll see this in a moment. The Torah turns everything over, like I said. The Torah is what God gives God pleasure. So there's two aspects that the glory of God fills the world, and the essence of God fills the world. Which one? Says the Inyan is that what it says, Ani Malay, that I fill the world. This is the level of Or Ein Sof that surrounds the worlds of Makifim. This is the aspect of God which is pure existence, right? The fact that we exist. This is everywhere equally. This is Sovev Makif. This surrounds what's called this kav, this speech of God, the pillar of creation. Lokal almost and all the worlds equally. He's Sovev Makif. That what God says, He surrounds the worlds. It doesn't mean that He surrounds them from the outside. Later Tarpanoimin, it says there's no place that's empty from God. That's what it means. I fill the worlds. Agam also with the Shemayim at the Oretz, they're filled equally. The heavens, the angels, and the rocks, equal godliness. Rakshan Soviv, in other words, they're equally far away from God, and also they're equally close to God. Rakshan Soviv, why is it called surrounding all the worlds? Why? Surrounding implies some sort of a spatial thing, no? Spatial, there's what's called inside and what's called outside, and God is outside, right? He says, no, it's not so. It's called, why? Because Eino Musag, because you cannot define it in any sort of world. The angels have no idea what the essence of God is. Ve'eino mislabish b'hasaga, it cannot be understood. And like I say, the aspect of God, it defies all definition. Not spiritual, not physical, not infinite, anything you can't. That which says that God fills the world, His glory, this is just a ray of godliness. So again, to stress to us that everything in the world is being created constantly by God. Every detail of the world is constantly being created. God is involved in every detail, every bug, everything. That's called how God fills the world. And simultaneously, this is God's essence. God's essence is revealed here, infinitely close to us, but infinitely far from us. It's creating the spiritual worlds also. That's the God of the Jews. Behold, opening this inside light, which is drawn down inside of the worlds. What's this got to do with Korach? We'll find out in a minute. This is by means of elevating all the worlds. This is by means of lifting up the worlds in what's called Nun Alafin, 50,000 jubilees. This is some sort of a spiritual term. What it means is Shemidgalim Yotera Orot Behakelim, that the worlds, so to speak, elevate, and there's more and more life revealed all the time. Something like we have today, science, right? Always revealing new things, right? The science of today, physics of today, is totally different than the physics how it was. Certain aspects, of course, are true. But how physics was 100 years ago, even in the days of Einstein, it's still totally different now. Physics, mathematics, they reveal new things. Science, medicine, everything elevates. This is a very, very sort of a weak comparison I'm giving, but the same thing as the worlds. The worlds are constantly, so to speak, elevating. Why is it called 50,000 jubilees? We can say that this is what it says, V'shem echav Yovel. Therefore, who Avi called Tofes Kinor. It says he is the father of all, right in the beginning of the creation, in the beginning of the Bible. He's the one that played music, because all of these elevations is by means of some sort of a song that the worlds sing, some sort of harmony that elevates them. Okay, nevertheless, all of these elevations and dynamic movements and things like this is all in Mamalik Ha'omi. This is all called Mamalik Ha'omi. That's the different, so to speak, the body of God, you want to call it. But then, then there's also what's called the surrounding light, a surrounding light of God as well. This we can compare, and I want to sort of skip through this. This is what we compare in a person. A person has a body, you have your mind, you have your emotions, you have your intellect, you have your soul. A person decides he wants to move his toe. How does he move his toe? It would take a whole book to write how complicated it is, that all of a sudden it rouses up a will in his mind. Where did his will come from? It came from some sort of a pleasure that he had in the past, whatever, and that he wants to move his toe. In order to do that, the idea comes into his mind. In order to have then the idea fires off something in his spinal cord, and that fires off the nerves, and the nerves then affect the muscles, and then the muscles then, coordinated with your feeling and with your eyes and everything, they move your bones, and then your bones, they move your toe. And then your toe, which is coordinated, like I said, with your eyes and with this, did it move the right way? Did it move the right way? This is a tremendously long process. They say that once there was a professor that stood up on the podium and he explained how complicated it is, the process of walking. When he finished the lecture, he stumbled and fell. He couldn't walk. He thought about it. Why? Because it's a thing that has to be automatic in a person. That's what it says. There's willpower. Willpower, or he says thought. Thought. As soon as the thought arouses on a person's mind, the highest level of thought, just the will, just arouses in his willpower and his thought, his mind. I want to move my toe. It happens instantaneously. And there's people that, and if you ever see people that pianists, right? They can play tremendously fast, faster than the mind could think. If they would think about it, right? Tremendously fast. They can, people that type, things like that, faster than the mind could think. Right? Because it's automatic. It's an automatic process. It's from the will, automatically moves. Right? So it says that's like this in a human being. We can see in ourselves. We have what's called willpower. Our willpower moves our eyes, moves our nose, moves our toes, moves everything automatically. That's something like Soviv Kolomim, how God surrounds all the worlds. It's found everywhere equally. That's me. My toe, it's just as much as my toe is my eye is my eye. Even my hair, even the hair is not so much of it. But it's still part of me. That's general, the eye. But then there's also the individual. That's what's called how God fills all the worlds. Mamalik Holmi. Okay, Kitzur. In Mamalik Holmi, how God fills all the worlds, how he surrounds the worlds. That's the idea of how God's glory fills the worlds. That's what's called Mamalik Holmi, and how Ani Mali, that's Soviv Holmi. The inner light, this inner light comes from this kav, this beam. And the surrounding, this is also drawn down in this beam into the world, but the source comes from Soviv Kolman. And all the worlds that elevate themselves, etc., this is all only in the Mamali Kolman. Only in how God fills the worlds is there's this elevation of worlds and things. But the aspect of Soviv Kolman, this is equal everywhere. Okay, that what it says that the world is filled with God's glory. It says that the earth is filled with God's glory, not the heavens. Says the earth, namely, Ein Kavod El Torah, that with God's glory, that's the Torah. Now we're getting into the Torah. And Kavod, it says that the world is filled with God's glory, that's the Torah. The word glory, Kavod, is the numerical value of 32. 32. Count it. Chaf is 20. Daled and Vav is 4 and 6, that's 30 and 2, 32. That exactly corresponds to the 32 strands of the Tzitzit. 32 strands of the Tzitzit, 8 on each corner. That's what it means. God's glory is on the heavens, the earth, and on the heavens. First of all, the earth. Why? Because by means of the Torah, when God put the Torah in the world, like I said, it flipped everything around. All of a sudden, this world became the highest. Okay. Yisrael, the Jewish people, in Shichlu, at the time of the Torah, that there would be revealed in this physical world, or in Sof, the infinite light of God, Hadraga Elias Eloi Achar Eloi Nun Alfim Yovlos. The Jewish people at Mount Sinai, God revealed his essence above how he surrounds the world, above how he fills the world, God's essence. Something that would take the worlds to reveal this level, thousands and thousands of whatever is jubilees, millions of years of normal elevations to get even approach this. Suddenly the it would take thousands of years of practice and elevations until it reached this. Therefore, the world, that's right, yes. But by means of the Torah that was revealed, because you have to remember the Torah comes from the Creator. And how do we even know that there is a Creator? Because first of all, God is creating us, that we even exist. And also he gave the Torah. It says when God gave the Torah, he gave himself. Because the Torah comes from this level of Chachma. It just comes out from this level of Chachma, which we said this level of Chachma, if you remember just a few minutes ago, we learned that this is the top of this Memalikom, the top of this pillar, the top of God's speech. And Or Ein Sof is enclosed in Chachma, this level of Chachma. Okay, this it's explained in the Tanya also, chapter 35. Therefore, the world of Atzilut is called Chachma. It shines in what's called Chachma of Ak, of Adam Kadmon, the highest of levels that could still be called a level, right? Like the division point between how God surrounds the worlds and fills the world. That's what's called Chachma Ak. That's where the Torah comes down. Hine b'shas Matan Torah, at the time of the Matan Torah, Hayamata, below in this world, the revelation of Chachma Eloah, the highest level of God that shines in Atzilut, the highest of the worlds. Asher hu Chachma Eloah v'Chachma Yediyah, that God, where there it says that God is wise, but no sort of known wisdom. That Chachma is clothed in Ein Sof. This is revealed on Mount Sinai. That's what was revealed on Mount Sinai. Oh, now we're going to get to the thing we said, the Tzitzit, right? The Tzitzit, that is this revelation of God in the world. That's what it says, called Dodi Dofek. That's what King Solomon said, that the sound of my beloved, Dofek, is knocking. That's what happened on Mount Sinai. God knocked on the hearts and the minds of all the Jews. Medaleg alahorim, he said he was jumping over the mountains, jumping over these highest levels of creation. What does it mean? He jumped over the whole entire creation, all these 50,000 jubilees and these different levels of we were just talking about, from Chachma and etc. below. That's what it means. The whole world is filled with God's glory. Only the physical world at Mount Sinai was revealed in this physical world. The highest of possible levels was revealed here. And the essence, above all the angels, above everything. Look, and therefore, in order that there should be this revelation, this jump, there had to be a big jump. That's the 32 paths of wisdom. That's kavod, we said. This is represented by the strands of the tzitzit. These strands called tzitzit. Okay, now it says that God does all the commandments that we do, which that of course makes absolutely no sense, because God does not have a body and God does not have a eyes or a nose or something that he can, do a commandment with. But nevertheless, it says that God created us in his image. And the Torah, it says, is also the image of God. It has 613 commandments compared to the corresponding to the 365 veins, it says, blood vessels, and 248 limbs. So it says that God also puts on tzitzit, does all the commandments, Asher Kirishon b'mitzvotav, with his commandments. So God also has these 32 strands of tzitzis, which we have. That's what's called God's essence of God's wisdom, the highest of the levels of godliness revealed here in the physical world. Because tzitzit, this shows on that God took me from says there's a pasuk, that he took me from the hairs of my head, the strands. This is drawing down like hairs, strands of God to shine in the Jewish people. That's the thing of tzitzit. Okay, on the tzitzit, you have to remember there's also the blue of the tzitzit. So it says that when God starts contracting himself, so to speak, contracting his light, and he draws it down into the world, that because these strands of godliness, which are represented by the tzitzit, that come from the corners of the garment, they're not God's essence, like we can see below, like we saw before, I'm sorry. So if so, this is a big problem. Because of this, there can be negative things in the world. This is because the aura, this ray of godliness that came down into the Torah, after all, it came down into a book. It came down into 2 tablets. The essence of God that creates all the heavens and the earth, it's infinite, it came down into a physical book in the world. This is a big problem for God. So therefore, because God wanted to draw down his essence into the world, as he couldn't do it directly, therefore, the light, which is embodied, so to speak, represented by these tzitzis, is so great, it can't be drawn into the normal world, called mochin de nukva, into this physical world, ki'im, except derech sarot. It has to be very, very concentrated and very limited. Like if you remember, we learned about the Nazir. It says that the Nazir, says that his hair will be holy. Like the 13 attributes of mercy, it says that comes from the 13 tufts of the beard. Comes from this is a very, very, how do you say, watered down godliness, but it's the essence of God. Okay, but there's a big problem, one second, with this. And that is, let's see where we can get to this. I'm sorry, I have to skip. That's the whole thing of the tzitzit. Like it says, like it says, the hairs of his head is like pure, clean wool. This is drawing down of godliness into the physical world. The chasadim, God's love, comes into the world through these 32 strands of the commandments. This is what's called pure godliness, pure love of God. That's what it means. Okay, where do these tzitzits come from? Where does it come from? It says it has to be made of the same thing as the garment. The talit, the garment of the tzitzis, this is what's called a makif. This is a surrounding level, which is totally above these strands that come down. These are the 32 strands of godliness, which are the Torah. They come from the garment. The garment is like the essence of God himself. So it says these 32 paths of wisdom, which are symbolized by the 32 tzitzit, which that's the numerical value of kavod, of God's glory, even though they are drawn down from this essence of God, and they come down into what's called an inside light, She'ein ze eluziv, it's just a ray. Nevertheless, it is made of the same stuff that the strands are made from the same stuff. What happened? Well, mina kanaf mamash. This is pure godliness, really. So the Torah, as it comes into the world, seems to be part of the world, especially the commandments, especially Tzitzit. It seems to be part of the world, but the fact of the matter is, it is pure godliness. Because this, you look at it and it looks like just a regular garment, but the fact is, it's coming down b'bechinas dilug. It's a tremendous jump. It jumps from the highest of highest levels, the tip of the beginning of the creation, down to this physical, the reason for the creation in this physical world. Shaloka Seder tells us not in an orderly way. Like we said before, this is the revelation of God's essence of his wisdom, that comes out from nothing. That's why Chachma is called ayin. It's called nothing. In regarding to Bina, Bina is a lower aspect than Chachma. Chachma is understanding. Chachma is also called Bina. Bina is called understanding. It's also Yesh, something that's there. So Yesh means a thing. Ayin is no thing. The world comes from Bina. That's Yesh. There seems to be a thing. The Tzitzit come from Chachma. That's no thing. It's not a thing. But it's in the world. It's part of the physical world. Says that's the whole point. God wants his essence to be revealed in the world. That's what it means, a kanaf, min a kanaf. That's what it means, that there has to be the edge of the garment itself, and the tzitzits, they come from the edge of the garment, from the same stuff. That's this level of sa'ar reshe. That's what it means, the hairs of his head are ka'amar naki, are pure a wool. That's what's called the chivir de Gilgalta, the pure whiteness of what's called God's skull. Okay, now we're going to get to the thing of the blue of the tzitzis. The blue of the tzitzis, we're going to say, is to push away all the bad that there is in the world. Push away all the bad. And this is where Korach is going to grab on to his argument. Moses, you're serving God, right? You're serving God that makes all these contractions and revelations and the Torah and the commandments and etc., right? Well, I'm also serving God, and I think that the way you're serving God is not the proper way. It has to be done the way that I say. What is the way that I say? Tune in tomorrow and find out. Now we'll learn this, to continue learning the Devar Malchut of the Rebbe about coming into this physical world. And this also commemorating the date that the Lubavitcher Rebbe came into America, signifying the beginning of the revelation of Mashiach, namely of the essence of God, and educating the whole world, in the whole entire world, even in America, as we'll talk about more in just a couple minutes.